You're listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. Margins and Meaning accepts zero responsibility for remakes, delamination, any knowledge that lived in one person's hands and went to the grave with them, judgment that never got passed on because somebody was too busy to explain it, wisdom that's sitting on a hard drive somewhere with no one alive to log in, or any version of institutional memory that died when the person who held it finally walked out the door for the last time. Anything I say on this show is just my opinion. It's not gospel. It's not CE. It's not legal advice. And it may cause you to think about things you haven't had time to think about in a while. If you choose to listen to anything discussed here today, do so at your own risk, preferably with a clear bench, a patient that got seated right the first time, and at least a few minutes where nobody needs anything from you. This one is for the people who were generous enough to teach you something. And maybe it's just for the people you haven't been generous enough to teach yet. Listen at your own risk. Thank you. Welcome back to Margins and Meaning. I'm John Wilson, and this is episode 17. And guys, if you made it through the last three, I thank you. I mean it. 14, 15, 16, that's what I call the craft trilogy. We're talking about those digital workflows utilizing analog judgment, using your voice as a clinical instrument, material selection as a diagnosis. Those three episodes, we're trying to say one thing in three different ways. You truthfully cannot separate the technician from the technology. The tool doesn't know what it's making. The person behind it does, or should. And I appreciate you staying with it. Today we shift, not away from the craft, never away from the craft. That's the whole point of this show, but to something that's been sitting underneath the last three episodes and honestly, underneath most of what I've tried to share on this show. The question isn't just how to be good at this. The question is, what happens to the good when you're gone? And guys, that's a hard sentence to say. And I'm not talking specifically about dying, though that's in there too. Eventually, that's true for all of us. I'm really talking about the daily version of it. The knowledge that sits in your head right now that nobody else has access to. The judgment you've built over the years that exists in exactly one place in this universe. What do you owe that to? I don't have a clean answer to that. I want to really be upfront and honest about that because this episode's not a solution. It's a question that I've been carrying for a while, and I think it's maybe worth an hour of your time. Because I think maybe you might be carrying it too, even if you haven't really had a chance to name it yet. One story, one principle. That's what this show does. Today, the story is about transmission. What moves? What doesn't? And what it cost the people who knew something, but didn't think it was important enough to pass it on. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start with a story about a technician that was in my life. His name was Dick, and he was a senior prosthetic technician that I admired. He was not what I would call a close personal friend. He was 40 years older than I was in that part of my career. I think I was 25 when I first met him. I'd been making prosthetics for maybe 5 or 6 years, and I had the luxury of meeting him. And there were some things about this man that just drove me insane. He worked like a pig. There was 4 inches of acrylic grindings and wax and just nastiness everywhere in his little laboratory. But I can tell you this man was gifted. He had been a prosthetic tech for twice my age at that time. He was probably pushing 50 years in this trade by the time that I had met him. He started as a son of another technician in the trade, and he was great at what he could do. And I'm going to share the story about this gentleman because to me, I think this trade is full of stories just like this. You know, sitting and watching him work, even in the frustrations that I had looking at his environment, it was very telling. He had very rudimentary tools, but he had hands and he had eyes and he had the knowledge behind them both. He could pick up an articulator and he could look at it, give it a quick glance of 30 seconds to a minute, and he would know more than most technicians that have been working a lifetime. He just had gained the wisdom, this pattern recognition, the ability to look at wear facets on prosthetics and know exactly how this patient was functioning. Being able to look at things in such a unique and very specific manner that it became so automatic to him. And I was always amazed watching him work. And one day I gained the courage to actually ask some questions. And he came from the part of the trade where, those little secrets were his to hold on to. It was never in his intention to brag or think that he had anything special. It was just how he'd work. And he would make some grand statement like just looking at it for 30 seconds and saying this case is, the video is off or it's side shifted or any of the things that I've learned over the years could actually be true with just a simple glance. And I admired it. I wanted to have that knowledge. And when I asked him how you could know that, he would just throw his hands up and smile and he says, I just know. And he couldn't verbalize it. And it was frustrating to me because I wanted to know how to make those determinations. And Dick is long gone now, and I often think about him. I think about what his hands had, what he could see with those eyes of his, those old, tired eyes. I think about him. I think about the amazing years that he had in this trade and the gifts that he had in his hands and the knowledge in his mind. And it's gone now. And me sitting by his side and absorbing a few little things, maybe 1/10 of 1% of what he had was transferred to me. And I honor that today. I share that. But when he died, he took something that this trade will never get back. That ability to look at something for 30 seconds and actually know something deeper than most will ever understand. And it's hard. Because the young 25-year-old that was sitting there in his presence didn't understand what I was looking at. I didn't have the things that I have today. I didn't have the wisdom to understand what was important. I didn't write down what he shared. I didn't know that it was necessary. You see, in those moments, the knowledge that was being gifted to me, it didn't announce itself as precious at the moment. It wasn't wearing a sign that says, this is something that you should write down. It was just how he worked. It's just what he knew. It was automatic. But now, all these years later, as I'm sitting here, I'm contemplating my own passing. I'm contemplating what I've acquired. What has value? And that's what this episode's all about. So here's an interesting thing. There's a lot of things in this trade that I can explain and teach. And there's many more that I just can't. The something that I can't explain is everything in this show up through episode 16. That records framework, that pre-flight checklist, the stoplight triage, the material selection as a diagnosis, the dual path triad, that virtual articulator, and why you should touch a real one before you trust a digital one. All of those things I can explain. I can give you the what and the why and the how and the decision tree and the signals to watch for. That's knowledge, and that transfers. The something that I just can't explain is different. It's that thing that happens before the framework is implemented. The thing that happens when the case comes across my bench and I open up that articulator and feel the movements. Before I really have had a conscious effort to digest the case, there's a feeling. It's not a checklist item. It's not a signal from the systems that I've implemented. It's a feeling, a wrongness. Just the way it sits in my hands when the inputs just don't add up. And guys, that feeling is real. And I've been lucky enough to save several cases because of it. It has triggered phone calls to clinicians that were never expecting a call because they just didn't see what I saw. And the hard part, the real hard part is I can't teach it to you. I can't teach you that feeling. I've tried, not in a real formal way, not in running a seminar, but with the people that work with me. I'll open a case and I'll say something like, something's off here. And then they'll look at it. And guys, my staff are great. They're good. They know what they're doing. And they'll sometimes just look at me and say, well, what is it? And I'll say, I'm not really sure yet, but look at it like this. And I'll point to the record in some way. I'll run my hands over the case and I'll share again. And sometimes they see it. They'll get there. They'll get there before I share. But usually, it's only after I've shared or named it. I've put some language to the feeling. And good for me for catching it. But what I can't give them that feeling that fired before any of the tools that I've provided them. The judgment underneath the framework is like that. It's hard. How do you teach that? I think it takes reps. It takes cases that go sideways. The ones that you knew were going to be testing you. It takes absorbing the consequences, and it takes being wrong often enough that being right stops feeling like luck and starts feeling like pattern recognition. And here's the problem. The actual problem that I've been sitting with for some time is this trade has made these reps get shorter. The cases that used to require a technician to work through a problem are getting handled upstream or automated or put into some template. The young tech coming today is competent at year 3 in a way that techs in my era just weren't competent in year 3. Genuinely, the software is extraordinary and the learning curve has accelerated. But the judgment comes from cases that made you uncomfortable. And if the uncomfortable cases are getting resolved by the software before they ever become uncomfortable, if the algorithm handles the complicated part before the technician ever sees it, well, then the technician is never going to develop that instinct. They develop technical fluency. And guys, that's real and it's valuable, but it's not the same thing. And I just don't know how you compress what took me 20 years into something smaller without giving up that 20 years. Because I'm not really sure it can be compressed. So let me tell you what happens when I try to pass this on. Not one story, because that's the honest version. It's not one story. It's an accumulation of them. It's years of standing next to people at the bench and watching the same gap open up over and over and not being able to close it no matter how I approached it. I've tried explaining it. I've tried demonstrating it. I've tried the method where you open the case and say nothing. Just watch them read it and see where they go. I've tried asking them questions instead of giving answers. I've tried walking through my own reasoning out loud, narrating the whole process as I work, so that the thinking is audible instead of just invisible. And some of that works. Parts of it can transfer. The framework, the language, the checklists, those can move on. I can hand a person a decision tree and they can learn to follow it. I can put this protocol in front of someone if they're willing to study it, and then it becomes theirs. But there's parts that doesn't follow that same route. Here's the thing I keep running into. I'll open a case and I'll say it's just a full low or existing denture, and it's the primary record. Patient's been wearing this case for a decade and the bite is just flat, the vertical collapse. The moment I pick it up, something fires. It's not a conclusion, not yet. It's just a signal. Something in my hands and my eyes says, slow down. This is more complicated than it's just been sent to me as. I've tried with different people across different years to make that signal legible. I'll open the bite in front of somebody and I'll say, hey, tell me what you see. And then they'll go through what I've taught them. They'll hit the landmarks, the ridge anatomy, the wear patterns. They're competent. The framework is working. They arrive at the right place. But here's the thing. When I ask them how they got there, which thing they saw first, what told them to slow down, they usually can't answer that because they didn't notice anything first. They assembled the evidence and the evidence led them somewhere. That's how frameworks work. And guys, that's not wrong. It's how good technicians work before something else develops. But it's different from what I'm doing. I'm not assembling the evidence and following it as a conclusion. I'm reading the whole work as a single picture. Before the evidence separates into parts, that picture is wrong before I can tell you which piece is off. You see, you can teach someone to read sentences, but guys, reading tone takes longer. I've spent years trying to find a bridge. That dual path try-in from episode 14 was one version of it, a way to codify the instinct, to translate it into a procedure you can follow, even if the instinct itself hasn't been developed yet. You see the signals, you run both paths. The procedure doesn't require the perception underneath it. It just recognizes a certain set of triggers. That's the best I've been able to do with the parts that actually lives in language. But here's the honest thing I keep bumping into. The thing I haven't resolved. The procedure works if you feel the triggers. If you don't have the instinct yet, you might not feel them at all. You might look at that collapsed denture and run your checklist and catch the vertical because the checklist told you to check the vertical. But catching it because the checklist caught it is not the same as catching it because your hands knew something before you even looked at it. I don't say that to diminish the checklist. I say it because I've tried to make the checklist a permanent substitute for instinct. And I don't think there is one. It's a bridge. It gets you across, but the instinct is the thing that tells you that the bridge exists in the first place. And I certainly haven't found a way to give someone that instinct directly. Not in 20 years of trying. The closest I can get is proximity and time and enough complicated cases under their belt to actually have them decide that they have a set of pattern recognition in them. I've sat with that limitation for a while now, and it's not comfortable. There's people I've worked with who are talented, who can deeply care about the work, who've learned from me, who I've learned from. And I still can't give them that 30-second feeling that I have when I hold a cast in my hand. Not because they're not capable of it, because it hasn't been fully accumulated yet. Because that accumulation can't be accelerated beyond a certain pace. What I can do is keep making the attempt, keep opening the cases in front of people instead of just handing them the case. Keep narrating my reasoning. And even when the reasoning is hard to put into words, keep saying something's off here out loud. So eventually the phrase has enough context around it that it starts to mean something specific to them. Guys, that's not a solution, but that's the best I have at this time. It's just what you have to do when the things you're trying to pass on keep arriving a year or two after the conversation. So I'm going to tell you something. There's something that concerns me more than just my own mortality in this trade. The knowledge that I'm worried about is not just the stuff that's going to go to the grave when I do. I'm worried about the stuff that's being skipped today, right now, in real time, because nobody really knew it existed in the first place. Things are changing, guys. The trade is changing. Let me explain what I mean. When I was coming up, the ability to be what I consider a fully functional, competent technician meant that you started at the bottom and you worked your way up. It wasn't glamorous. Pouring models and articulating cases and doing all the repetitive tasks that would teach you not just one part of the equation, but allows you to have a better understanding of what the next guy needs and the next guy needs. It allows you to grow as a technician. You were building a pattern library that I mentioned. You were accumulating the data that would eventually become your 30-second read when you picked up a case. You were doing the reps. And when they failed, they taught you something that the software isn't going to teach you. But today, guys, that path is shortening. Not for everyone. Not everywhere. But the significant parts of this trade, the entry point is only digital, right? Anybody coming up through the lab today is going to jump into the computer. And they can genuinely become competent in a very short period of time doing clinical quality work without having the real fundamentals behind them. In 3 years, a digital tech can have a workflow that wasn't even around 10 years ago. 3 years, and the work is good. The outputs are good, and the patients are served, and that's wonderful. But something that is being built in 3 years is not going to give you the background that you need when the cases that come in tap that anomaly. We all know the average cases, the digital technician can do what they're supposed to do and have success. But what happens when that collapsed bite comes in or a really tough surgical complication hits? The case where the record is lying and the software doesn't know it. That anomaly requires something the digital workflow never asked them to build. You see, when the anomaly hits, when it hits that technician who has 30 years of pattern recognition behind them, the pattern fires. Something feels wrong. The instinct activates, and that technician catches it. When the anomaly hits a technician who has 3 years of digital fluency, that workflow is going to continue. The software is not going to flag it because the software wasn't built to flag cases to see that sort of thing. And the technician who is smart, who's skilled, who's doing everything correctly, well, he's not going to slow down because their digital training didn't teach them this. They didn't teach them this feeling, this wrongness that feels. That's not the technician's fault. That's the path's fault. Or the trade's fault for not protecting the path when the shortcut appeared. And here's what worries me most about the 2026 version of this problem. It's not just that the knowledge is being lost. That's sad and it's unfortunate. And I'm doing my damnedest not to let what I have go to the grave with me. But that's just the nature of knowledge in this industry, and it's sad. It's why I shared that story about Dick. He was a friend of mine. He was an amazing technician. And so much of what he learned went to the grave with him. The hardest part for me now is understanding that the knowledge is being skipped before anyone realizes that it was something worth knowing. At least when guys like me and Dick were doing what we're doing, we all held it. We held it in our hands. We valued what we had learned. But today, when it's being skipped, the sad part is nobody is acquiring that knowledge in the first place. A technician that has read collapsed bites, held it in their hands, knew exactly what was off when they looked at a case. Well, today, that quiet little wrongness doesn't seem to occur, and it's unfortunate because the gap is really invisible from the inside of this trade. But guys, it's going to show up in the mouth 5 years from now, 10 years from now. In the cases that somehow got to the other side of complicated and nobody could explain why they failed. Because the person who would have caught it in the design phase never had those developed skills. They didn't know the thing that they needed to know to catch it. And that's what this AI-assisted design and automated workflow, guys, is accelerating. Because it can accelerate the good. It can give you efficiency. It has precision. The throughput is real. It gives opportunity to smaller labs. And that's all awesome. It's amazing. But guys, we need to stand tall alongside them. The thing that has to be built is the human at the bench. Separate that from the workflow. Because in order for the workflow to produce excellent outcomes on the hard cases, you need to have the judgment. And I don't see enough conversations about how to build that thing deliberately, when the path that used to build it is by getting there by accident, by failing, by not understanding what was needed in the first place. Because now the software is telling you. And that's the problem I'm sitting with. So I want to talk about the different ways this trade passes something on. Not the official ways, not CE credits, not dental schools, not the textbooks. The way it actually happens between people. In the normal course of staying in the work and giving a damn about the person beside you. Because I've been trying to do it for years. And every method reaches slightly differently. None of them are complete. But all of them matter. The bench is the most direct. One person, one case, two sets of eyes on the same thing. You say, hey, hand me that. Or you say, hey, look at where the bite is sitting. You say, hey, you feel that resistance when you move this articulator sideways? Well, that's what I'm talking about. And the transfer happens at the bench in what I believe is the highest resolution version we have to work with. You can watch somebody's hands. You can catch the thing before they name it wrong and redirect it in real time. And when it works in a way nothing else matches. But the issue is at the bench, it only reaches who's sitting at that bench. One person, two if you're lucky, and it only works when both people are present. And the case is right in front of them, and nobody is behind on a deadline. And in a real lab, that combination happens less often than you want it to. The forum or online forums, that's something else entirely. I've been a part of internet forums for as long as I've been on the internet, and it's been something I've enjoyed. Dental Lab Network for a long time, I was member 2469, which tells you when I got there and what I thought of the place. And even then, now somewhere north of 5,000 posts that I've had on there, and most of them technical, and most of them exactly what you'd expect. Cement gaps, maybe telescope designs, framework questions, implant protocols, and they were problems with answers. You post the answer and move on. But what the platform does, what it has done for this trade for years, is something bigger than any single post. I think it's where technicians who've never ever met, who are working in completely different states, completely different markets, can sit down next to each other on a thread and actually work through something real. A tech in a small shop in Wyoming who has never seen a case before can post on DLN and get a response from somebody who's seen thousands of them. The distance now disappears. The gap between the isolated bench and the collected wisdom of the trades closes, at least a little. At least on that question. At least on that day. And I think that matters. And I want to say it clearly because I think there's people that have given years of their knowledge to that platform, answering the questions at 10 o'clock at night when it would have been way easier just to scroll. That written out explanation for a process that they have done thousands of times because a newer tech really needed to see it in words. Those people have done something real for this trade. And the truth is that platform still exists today because they kept showing up. And the technician who got the answer and went back to the bench and got the case right, well, the patient got something directly from DLN as well. You can trace it if you want to. The line runs straight. The limitation of the forum is the same as any written word. You post it, and then it's on its own. You don't know if it's really landed. You don't know what context the person reading it was bringing to it. You can't see their face when they read it and know whether it clicked or slid past. But maybe 5 years from now, someone might find that post in a simple search and it will be exactly the info they needed. Or it will be buried under thousands of newer threads that no one will ever have the opportunity to find. You don't control what happens to it after you hit send. And then there's the room. I've stood in front of a lot of rooms over the years and been very grateful for that opportunity. I don't say that to count them. I say it because each one of them taught me something that posting never did. When you're in front of a room, giving a lecture or showing a demonstration, any real gathering where people showed up to actually give their time and actually listen to what you have to say, well, I think you feel something when it lands. You feel something when somebody in the back row recognizes it because they've lived it. You feel that person in the third row who is now trying not to nod too hard because what you're describing is exactly the thing that they've been carrying alone and thought nobody else understood. The feedback. That feedback is immediate and you can't fake it. And sometimes it changes how you talk. Not so much the content, but your calibration. You learn which words get the room and which words will lose it. You learn that the story always works better than just the principle, and the principle only can land after the story has done its work. But the room has its limits too. The room only reaches the room. The people who could afford to travel, the people who already knew that the conversation was worth having, the people who had the time and expensed it, people that had the awareness that this kind of thing actually existed. And then there's the technician who maybe needed to hear it the most, working alone, nowhere near this event. Well, he doesn't even know the room actually happened. And now that's where maybe this podcast can sit. It's not better than the bench or the forum or any room that I stood in front of. It's just different. Maybe it can reach a bit further. Maybe it can get to more ears. As I sit here and I look back on my life in this trade, I'm trying to honor a promise that I made myself. Coming up in the day where people were holding their special talents and secrets to themselves, I just did not believe in that. I certainly wanted to give a leg up to the guys coming behind me. Every single time I fell down and got up stronger because of my tenacity, I wanted to push that forward to the next guy. I still do. So now I have to really contemplate on a few things. Well, we know that the bench, the person sitting right in front of me, well, they're going to have the highest resolution of learning and having that pass on to them. But guys, that's my smallest radius. The forum thread that I post on can reach across the country. And it's available right now if you search for it correctly. The room that I stand in front of, well, then I got to connect with these people that are committed enough to show up in that room. So now maybe that's why I am sitting here with this podcast. Guys, it's not better than the bench or the forums or the rooms that I stand in front of. It's just different. It's given me one more opportunity to share the wisdom. Maybe it's a bit more persistent than a conversation, but less immediate than the lectures. But I can tell you, I'm honoring a promise that I made to myself early on in this career, stating that I would never hold the knowledge hostage. I would always give it away freely. That every time that I bled by falling down and getting up with the persistence and tenacity that I had would have meaning if I passed it on. And I'm trying to honor that. Because, guys, the person at the bench is always going to get the highest resolution of learning, but unfortunately, that's my smallest radius. The forum thread reaches across the country on specific questions right now for whoever is searching for it. The room is to honor the people committed enough to show up. But this podcast might reach a person that found it on Tuesday, 2 years after I recorded it. Sitting at the bench, listening to my words, maybe having a question answered that nobody else in their shop could answer. But here's the truth. None of those mediums are the whole thing. All of them are just an attempt. And I think the attempt is what we owe each other, not perfection, not the certainty that the message will land, just the willingness to say something useful in a form that can travel farther than just the length of your arm. That's the goal. So I'm going to say something carefully here because for some reason, I just feel this episode pulling towards a conclusion that would be slightly dishonest. You see, there's a version of this story where I could tie a bow on it, where the message is, hey, teach what you know, document what you can, and the trade's going to be stronger for it. And that's true as far as it goes, but it leaves something out. And then the something that it leaves out is the uncertainty of it all. I don't know if the DLN posts will persist. I know that many of these forums will go to members-only content, and, the search algorithm doesn't favor those types of things. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows if those conversations are still sitting there? I hope they will be. But maybe they're going to be deleted or archived or just buried under so many more relevant modern threads that the information never spreads. And I feel the same way about this podcast. When I'm done making them, I wonder, will it reach whoever needs them? The ones who need them most are not always the ones who know where to look. And I don't know if the people I've worked with over the years will develop that 30-second read. I believe some of them will, but hoping and knowing are not the same thing. And I've been in this trade long enough to know that talent and willingness is not the whole equation. Those reps have to happen. The consequences have to be accumulated. And I can't do that for anyone. I can put them next to the hard cases. I can make the phone calls with somebody listening in. I can walk through my reasoning instead of just stating my answer. But I can't give what Dick gave me just by being in the room, because Dick didn't give it to me deliberately. It transmitted by proximity over enough time and enough cases that some of his pattern library attached to mine. And that took years. And I'm not sure I have years to spend on any one person at a level it would actually require. And that's a very uncomfortable thing to sit with. It's the gap in the middle of everything that I've said today. I believe in the transmission, and I believe this show is an attempt at it. I believe the forum posts and the bench conversations and the phone calls with a newer tech listening in, I believe all of that is doing something. But some of what I know is still going to die with me. And that's sad. But the good thing is, it's not the big things that I think about most. The big things I try to put into these episodes, into the frameworks, into the words, the big things. I've at least had a chance to become external to my little bubble. It's the small things, the 43 years of small things, the specific way I've learned to read a particular kind of case, the feel of a fit that's right versus the fit that's sitting but maybe not seated, the judgment that lives below the language, the knowledge that doesn't announce itself as knowledge because maybe it just feels how a Tuesday works. And I'm going to try to document what I can. I have been trying. This show is part of that. But that feel itself, the thing that fires before the thinking and lives in my hands, I don't know how to put that anywhere else. I want to say something to the older technicians listening because I think this message lands differently for people who've been doing this for 20 years than it does for people who are 4 years in. Guys, you know something. You know a tremendous amount of things. And some of what you know is probably the only place in the world that that thing exists. Not in a textbook, not in a software parameter, not in a training video. In your hands. In the cases that you've absorbed. In the read you developed without knowing you were developing it. And you can be humble about that. You should be humble about it, but you can't be passive about it. Humility and passivity are not the same things. But remember, the trade doesn't need you to be self-congratulatory about what you know. It needs you to put it into a form that can travel. It needs you to say something true at the bench, to write something useful on a forum, to show up in a room somewhere and tell a story of a case that went wrong and what it cost you, and most importantly, what it taught you. It needs you to make the attempt, even when the attempt is imperfect, even when you can't get all the way across. Because what you leave behind may not be what you intended to leave. Dick didn't intend to leave me with a partial copy of his pattern library. I don't think he thought about it at all, as far as I can tell. He just showed up and worked and occasionally talked about work. And I was lucky enough to be in the proximity long enough to absorb some of it. And maybe this podcast might work in the same way. The listener who gets something real out of episode 14 may not articulate it as that dual path trine. It might be transmitted as posture, as a willingness to slow down on the complicated cases, to hold the casts maybe a beat longer, to feel the thing before naming it. Well, that's imprecise. That's transmission with information loss, but it's not nothing. And it might be just the best we can do. And you guys know me by now. 43 years in and starting in the garage 6 days a week with rudimentary tools in that furnace. Building something. Nearly losing it. Deciding to rebuild it smaller and better. Lucky enough to have people around me that cared about the work the way I care about the work. I've been at this bench long enough that some of my clinicians have known me longer than their marriages have lasted. And guys, I'm not done. I want to be clear about that. I'm not writing a eulogy here. The work continues. The mills are running. There's a full arch case on my bench right now that I need to finish, and I'm going to finish it, and finish it well. And the patient in that chair is going to get everything I have to give. But I'm thinking about what happens to what I have when I'm not the one carrying it anymore. And I think about the trade that deserves that conversation, not just from me, from all of us who've been here long enough to have something to say. And the thing I want you to understand is the obligation isn't to have all the answers. The obligation is to try, to document where you can, to say something true at the bench, to make a phone call in front of someone who's still learning, to post on a forum when you're tired and it would be so much easier to do nothing, to show up in a room and stand in front of people who are figuring out the same things you figured out a long time ago, and to understand that what you leave behind may not be precisely what you intended to leave. It might be smaller. It might be incomplete. It might reach the wrong person at the right time. or the right person at a moment when they're not ready for it yet. But you try. You try anyways because the alternative is silence, and silence is the most expensive thing in this trade. It always has been. Okay, friends, I have one more thing to say before I give you the sign off, and please stick with me because I think it's gonna be impactful. You know, I've been doing this 43 years, and I have the luxury now of not performing. I'm not building a brand, I'm just doing what I do. At the bench, with my hands, with cases that have real patients on the other end of them, and real clinicians that are counting on me, and the real consequences when I got it wrong. 43 years of that, and I'm still here, still working, still at the bench. But this episode is the closest I've come on this show to saying the thing that I've been circling for a long time. The thing underneath the framework, and the tools, and the case stories. The part where I acknowledge that maybe I'm carrying knowledge that has nowhere to go. Not all of it. I've put some of it into episodes, into posts, into conversations at the bench, into phone calls I've made in front of people that were learning. Some of it is out there. Some of it's already found someone who actually needed it. But not all of it. Not most of it. The majority of what 43 years at the bench has built. The pattern library, the feel, the instinct that fires before the thinking. It really lives in exactly one place, and that place is not permanent. And the people who need what's in there don't always know how to ask for it. And most times, I don't know how to give it to them, even when they do. I don't know how to make this any less heavy. I've tried to in this episode, and I keep coming back to the weight of it. So I believe that I'm just going to leave it heavy, because I think that's the most honest version of this conversation. And I think the honest conversations are the ones that you take back to the bench with you. This has been episode 17 of Margins and Meaning. If this show has value to you, share it with one technician, one clinician, one person who's still carrying something they haven't passed on yet. Guys, that's the whole distribution model. There are no ads. There are no sponsors. There is no machine. There's just this, and the people will find it useful, and the conversations it starts. And guys, that's enough for me. Next episode, we get into the mechanics of how expertise compounds over a long career and what separates the technician who keeps getting better at year 40 from the one that plateaued at year 5. And guys, that's not a rhetorical question. I actually have a real answer, and it surprised me. So I'll see you then. And this is John Wilson one more time for Margins and Meaning, reminding you to protect your margins, protect your meaning. Thank you.